Good morning from Chicago, where Democrats just wrapped up their 4-day convention, giving their nomination to Vice President Kamala Harris.
Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward, not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans.
In New Hampshire, political analysts were watching this address very closely. Here's what Scott Spradling had to say about the vice president's message.
I think she successfully pitched herself as an American, uniquely American story. I think they were very smart strategically to really just go back into her life's narrative and share how she became Kamala Harris. It was an interesting storyline, probably one that not a lot of people knew, and it once again adds a new flavor to this presidential race that 30 days ago was a completely different election.
A long list of high-profile Democrats stopped by New Hampshire delegation breakfast. We'll start with Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, who still has a lot of friends left over in New Hampshire from his 2020 presidential run. Senator Booker, there have been a lot of light and bright days in this campaign. It's a lot of joy so far at this convention. What's going to happen, though, in the fall when those darker days happen? This campaign gets punched in the face. You know, it's going to happen. There are going to be worse days.
Yeah, look, I know Kamala, and she's used to that kind of fighting, and she's used to dealing with people like Donald Trump. But I feel something different in America. I feel that people want to turn the page on the tribalism, on the meanness, on the put-downs and the insults, and get back to the work of us working together, finding our common ground. And there is common ground. So I'm excited that when I talk to the Vice President Kamala Harris, when I talk to her team, they know that the yearning in America right now is for a new horizon. Their yearning is enough of the partisanship. They want leaders that bring us together. And that's why I think at the end of the day, she's going to distinguish herself from Donald Trump, who puts down Republicans with the same viciousness that he puts down Democrats. I mean, think about talking about DeSantis's height, Nikki Haley's heritage, Chris Christie's weight, John McCain's military service. Enough of that kind of meanness. We need people that are going to lift us, because when America is lifted, there's nothing we can't do.
That division is there somewhat in the Democratic Party right now over the issue of Israel and the war in Gaza. You're all about unity. How do you bring together these two disparate factions within the party? And in particular, this anti-Israel attitude among young people, how do you avoid that getting infected with anti-Semitism?
I mean, this has been really one of the most anguished times of my career, to see the rise in a lot of different types of hate around this issue, from anti-Islamic hate to even my Sikh brothers and sisters getting attacks. And there's no religious-based hate that we see in America. Jews are only 2.5% of our population, but they make up over 50% of the hate crimes that are religiously based. We have to understand that Americans of goodwill all want the same thing. We want the end of this conflict, innocent people to stop dying, hostages to come home, and a two-state solution. We can't forget that we all want that. That's why I was over in Israel on October 7th to meet with the Saudis and Palestinian leaders to talk about a larger regional peace deal that would entail a two-state solution. Hamas and all the Iranian proxies do not want peace, do not want a two-state solution. And what happened on October 7th plunged us into this point where thousands and thousands of people have died. Americans have been taken hostage. We've got to get back on the road to peace. And that's what I think we've got to focus on, that work. And by the way, Biden in his final days, I know this, what's happening with the State Department, with our Secretary of State, with McGurk, our negotiator, they're doing extraordinary things right now to get the ceasefire in place, hostages home, and back on a pathway to that peace that we all want.
And last question for you, Senator. We talked to you in 2022. You said you were hoping the New Hampshire primary would stay first. Obviously, a lot of drama, a lot of water under the bridge since then. Do you think New Hampshire saved that first-in-the-nation status in this last primary?
I want to tell New Hampshire something. As a guy who spent a lot of time up there, there's something special about the tradition you have. It is really amazing, and I was talking about it to the delegation that's here. It is the kind of grassroots campaigning that in Newark, that's how I'm here, knocking on doors, talking to people. It's a small enough state where you can do that. We've got to preserve that specialness. I have this loyalty now to New Hampshire, and I'm going to do everything I can to help to maintain the traditions that you all have had that are even heralded in some of our favorite media, like one of my favorite shows about the White House. So. The West Wing. And so I'm excited about seeing how this goes, but I think New Hampshire did a lot in this last primary system to sort of retain that specialness.
We asked Senator Amy Klobuchar about the difference between this campaign and 2016. Senator Hillary Clinton was talking about that glass ceiling. It has proven remarkably durable. Are you confident that it can be broken in 2024?
I really am, because this time it's different. This time we've seen for years the attacks on women when they're running, attacks on their laughs, attacks on their clothes, and this time they're turning it back on them. And a lot of it's on the internet, and I have just loved how they went after Kamala Harris on coconut trees. Now we see coconut tree memes. They went after a laugh, and now it's mashed up to Beyonce songs. It is a changed situation right now, and some of it maybe it was sudden. Some of it may be that we really learned from people like Hillary Clinton and those of us that ran in 2020 that it's not easy to run as a woman candidate. But I don't think anyone is doubting that Kamala Harris has the receipts. She has been a leader on the international stage. She's been a leader domestically, helping to get us through the pandemic to a much stronger economy, and she has a plan for the future. I think all of those things make people feel better. And I guess the final thing, when you've got 2 women senators out of New Hampshire, more and more women are in leadership roles. We just saw the mayor of Boston. We've got governors all over the country, like Governor Whitmer. And of course, New Hampshire having the first 2 women that served as both governor and senator. So that makes a difference. When they see women in these leadership roles, then they are ready to vote for a woman president.
You lived through January 6th. What's your reaction when you see Senator Ron Johnson calling this switch in nominees a coup?
No, this is a democratic process, and we actually follow the rules of our party. No one has any serious dispute that President Biden, it was in his right to step down and not be the nominee before the party convention. We're having a party convention to pick a nominee. We had a roll call vote. You're going to see all the states in all their glory tonight. That's our right, and he made that decision, and he rightfully and lawfully passed on the torch.
You know Governor Tim Walz better than most, and now he's on the national stage. And it seems like Minnesota has already gone through this discussion about his service. But what do you think about this idea that he should have deployed?
Let's make this clear. He served in the National Guard. Both Minnesota and New Hampshire get this. When you're in the National Guard, you do get activated to other countries. His unit was sent to Europe in the early 2000s. That's what he did. But he also served the homeland for 24 straight years. He signed up when he was 17 years old. He went 4 years past when the retirement was and ended up, that was because he was going to run for Congress, and he ends up as the highest enlisted member to ever serve in Congress, not to mention the head of the Veterans Committee. So he has had an outstanding career in the military. Everyone in Minnesota knows that. And so this is just a side issue by a campaign where their lead candidate, Donald Trump, has called veterans suckers and losers.
Last question for you, Senator. You experienced the New Hampshire primary. What do you think about how the primary went this time around? Obviously, there was a lot of drama around that in the Democratic Party. How do you think New Hampshire Democrats handled themselves?
I think they handled themselves incredibly well. They were out there. They were organizing. They're showing no matter what situation that we are given, we are going to participate. And I think that was the message from them. And, I personally was very clear. I would have kept New Hampshire where they were, and we'll go forward from there.
Security, a high priority here in Chicago. We spoke with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker about efforts to keep this convention safe.
We've got peaceful protesters, and we're protecting their First Amendment rights. And that's our job, right, to make sure that they're safe and also that the people who are coming to visit are safe and, of course, the residents of the city. And that has all happened. So I feel very proud. Of course, it's our job, right? Law enforcement, making sure that people can enjoy the city the way they ought to.
What is the biggest contrast Democrats are drawing in this convention with Donald Trump and the Republicans?
Well, I talked to the delegation breakfast this morning here for New Hampshireites, and I got to say the most important and I think easy contrast that people can see is Republicans are about cruelty. I mean, the difference between the Republicans and Democrats is kindness and cruelty. Democrats are fighting for people's individual rights and for people to have choices in their lives, to make sure that they can afford health care, that they can get a better job, that they can get a better wage. Those are things that I think we all ought to be standing up for as Americans. The Republicans don't seem to be for that, right? They want an economy that's good for Elon Musk, but not for everyday working people.
Many Democrats are saying the feel of this convention is rare. Senator Jeanne Shaheen telling us in a one-on-one interview, they're not all like this. Senator Shaheen, you've been to many, many Democratic conventions. What makes this one different?
You know, I was talking to a longtime political activist last night who's volunteering behind the scenes, and she said this convention is not like anything that she's experienced because there's no tension. There are no factions. People are not fighting. Everybody is working together. We know we've got a tight time frame. We know there's a lot at stake in this election if we're going to defeat Donald Trump and make sure that Kamala Harris is the next president of the United States. And all of that has been put aside. People are just working together, working hard, focusing on November.
You talked all about foreign policy. Obviously, that's part of your portfolio. What are the consequences in this election between Harris or Trump in the White House?
Well, Vice President Harris will continue the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, support for human rights, continued commitment to supporting Ukraine, to defeating autocrats like Vladimir Putin and President Xi in China, continuing to stand up to the PRC in China. And what we've heard from Donald Trump is a sort of belief in those autocrats. Donald Trump sidles up to Vladimir Putin. He talks about President Xi in positive tones. He talks about Viktor Orban being a model. Those are autocrats who are not supporting democracy. We need a president who is going to support democracy, who's going to make it very clear that we stand on the side of democracies around the world. I was just in Georgia, where their government has been backsliding despite the will of the people of Georgia who want to join the EU, who want to look west. And what they said was, well, we're just going to wait out the election because we think Donald Trump is not going to stand up for human rights. He's not going to be somebody who's going to continue to hold governments accountable when they don't support the will of the people. So there's a lot at stake globally in this election as well.
Coming up after the break, more from the Democratic National Convention, including our interviews with Pete Buttigieg and Maryland Governor Wes Moore.